Hi, Workwell listeners. I'm really excited to share that my book, Work Better Together, is officially out. Conversations with Workwell guests and feedback from listeners like you inspired this book. It's all about how to create a more human-centered workplace. And as we return to the office for many of us, this book can help you move forward into post-pandemic life with strategies and tools to strengthen your relationships and focus on your well-being. It's available now from your favorite book retailer. Many of us probably don't think of work as a happy place, but we should, because when we're happier at work, we're more engaged, more productive, more innovative, and more creative. And everyone benefits from a happier workplace culture, not just the workforce, but also the organization and society as a whole. This is the Workwell podcast series. Hi, I'm Jen Fisher, Chief Wellbeing Officer for Deloitte, and I'm so pleased to be here with you today to talk about all things well-being. I'm here with Jen Limm. She's the CEO and co-founder of Delivering Happiness, a coaching and consulting company that's helped hundreds of organizations use the science of happiness to co-create adaptable organizations that grow people, profits, and purpose, not just to survive, but to thrive. Jen's also the author of the newly released and best-selling book, Beyond Happiness: How Authentic Leaders Prioritize Purpose and People for Growth and Impact. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. There's, never too many Jens in the room, so.
Never. But you're two N's and I'm one N, so at least we differentiate that way, right?
That's right. We're our own individual people.
Yeah, I had a good childhood friend also named Jen, and they called us Gen 1 and Gen 2. So we always fought over who was number 1 and who was number 2. So anyway, Jen with two N's. Tell us about your story. I want to know who you are. Tell us about your journey. Like, we want to get to know you.
Oh, wow. I guess, I guess I'll just start back from like the graduating and being a .com baby back in the day. .com days were crazy. Money, title, status was huge. And it really flowed really easily, especially for someone that had an Asian American studies major. And so, luckily I was able to swing a job. But as we all know, the .com busted and I got spit out. I lost my job, got laid off. And then all the same year, 9/11 and my dad, we all found out that he had stage 3 colon cancer. Wow. And that hit me pretty hard for all those different reasons that you can imagine, but it really rearranged my life and my priorities, and the realization that I was chasing this, ridiculous stuff of money, title, status when things are just so much more important in life. So at that point, I just decided to switch gears and actually focus on what's most important. And I realized, without saying it, those were my values. And without saying it, I was trying to figure out what my purpose was. So at that point, I just knew that I had to switch gears into doing things that I had more sense of control. I didn't want to get laid off again. I just started becoming a consultant at a big firm. So I was just doing my own thing when I met Tony Hsieh through a mutual friend. And that's when he just became CEO of Zappos. And we just connected really well. And as Zappos grew, I kind of grew with them and doing just random projects at the beginning, strategy, marketing, etc. But as their culture wasn't a word back then, a buzzword yet, as they started developing more programs on that using scientific happiness and positive psychology, that was, to me, like pretty revelatory of like, whoa, I don't have to be an existentialist all my life. I can actually apply things that people have learned already and data and research on these topics that really felt near and dear to me. And being able to do that in, a company setting, like experimentation wise and like a petri dish, was like super exciting and interesting. And, I did that for several years when the book deal for Delivering Happiness came about in 2010. And that's when Tony and I launched that book. And then lo and behold, we didn't know there was going to be a company coming out of it. But there was a demand for that, especially in the workplace. A lot of things that you talk about in your book. And that was just, it was just a huge, I guess for me, awakening of people saying, "Oh, well, that's all good for Zappos, but it can't happen in my place, my workplace." And I was just like, "No, I want to prove you wrong. Like it can. It has to be able to." So here we are. Yeah, fast forward 11 years later, still running, delivering happiness, and yeah, still feeling very optimistic about, even though we have so much stuff going around us to bring us down, but there's so much optimism as to what we can do for ourselves in the workplace and in our lives.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate using the word pivotal, but I'm going to use it. I do feel like we're kind of at this pivotal moment where, everybody, because of the pandemic and what we've been living through, is taking a little bit of a restock of their lives and their values. But
Mhm.
let's talk about the workplace. And so, I mean, I think even pre pandemic, workplaces are often associated with being unhappy or stress. How have we gotten to this place of like work is synonymous with being burnt out? Because I
Mhm.
feel like that's so much of what we're hearing and saying, and truly what so many people are feeling.
Yeah, I think that just the interesting part of it, this pivot that we're all going through is that we all kind of knew the associations with workplaces being that way. That
Yeah.
it was just so hard to try and reframe those associations, um, especially before the pandemic. But then with the pandemic, to try and make the most of a really unfortunate, tragic situation for so many people in the world, especially within their work realm. I think that whole catalyst of we've been hearing future of work for so long,
Yeah.
and the future of work is like basically right now. And like you're seeing it, we're all seeing it, the great resignation, the great awakening, whatever you want to call the great XYZ.
Yeah.
I think it's just such a prime moment to not even just apply it to workplaces, but to really dig deep into our own lives and how they're so intertwined of how we spend our time, basically.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of the word happy. And,
Yeah.
and the word, happy or happiness especially in the workplace, because I think the word happy can mean a lot of things. So when you talk about creating happier workplace cultures and you do the work that you do with organizations, like what does that actually mean and what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah, it's and the word happiness, especially after 2020 and after, or well, during 2020 and
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
COVID hit, people wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Like they're just like, "What are you talking about? There's no way we could talk about happiness right now." And I totally resonated with that. And it's a large reason why I named my book Beyond Happiness, because it's kind of like, let's get rid of those perceptions of what
Mm,
happiness means. And for us, we've always based it on the science of. And this goes all the way back to, philosophical times of Socrates and Aristotle hanging out talking about what's the meaning of life, and Aristotle is famously known to say, well, happiness is the purpose of our existence. But more importantly, what he said was that happiness is dependent on ourselves. So if I define happiness now, I still base it on the science, but I think everyone has their own redefining of happiness. I don't know if you've noticed this too. Some people are coming to me and saying, whether they're CEO or frontliner, they're saying, I'm not even sure what happiness means anymore.
yeah.
But if I ground it, number one, it's being true to yourself, having that sense of inherent disposition of who we are as individuals. The second type of happiness is also pleasures, that we all need. A glass of wine, Netflix binge, those are all part of who we are, and part of like how we derive a sense of happiness. But they're very fleeting. And the most sustainable form of happiness that we know time and time again is purpose.
Mm,
And we hear that word so much now.
yeah.
and that in itself, I think, needs a defining too. But essentially, what are we doing that's bigger than ourselves as companies? What are we doing that's greater than making more money? And that's where I ground the definition of happiness. And that's the kind of conversations we start, when we work with companies.
And so, how does that translate? I guess you look at kind of individual happiness or purpose, and then how that kind of translates into the work the workplace or the organizational purpose. Is that kind of what you're saying?
More or less,
Yeah.
because um, we pretty much try to plug in wherever the organization or the team, the current state. Like some are really evolved because they already have their purpose statement, and they're big on culture, they're big on people, and some are on the other end of the spectrum where they're just like really wanting to understand what that all even means on a day-to-day basis. So I think the biggest thing that we've learned, especially in the last few years, is that nowadays it's not unusual. I mean, to have companies with purpose and values and mission
Right.
statements, like it's a given, right? But now what we've seen, the more successful companies that implement all of this stuff,
Yeah.
is that when they're really actually sincere, when leaders are actually sincere about realizing they're not just checking off a box of things to do, in prioritizing what culture is and prioritizing what it means for to actually treat your people better. It really comes down to when there's a leader that realizes this is not a box to check off because they had some time or moments in their life where they reflected on their own life and what they're actually doing and why they're in this position. Then they realize that that purpose statement that they developed so committed to and try to evolve because they want to be known for something bigger than making money, until they connect it to every single person's individual purpose in a sincere and genuine way, then there's a gap. And I think that's what we've seen most effective, especially since the pandemic, of those leaders that really take time to actually help, be the archaeologist or be the architect of what individuals' purposes are, and then helping that to help define how you actually ladder that up and connect it in a more meaningful way to the purpose of the company.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that really resonates with me, and certainly something that, we're seeing a lot of, and a lot of conversations that I have, you know, uh, in particular about purpose, because I think that, and I know that this was true for me, when I started to do the work to think about and discover my own personal purpose, it's like we we tend to believe that purpose has to be, I mean, it does need to be something that's bigger than us, but it doesn't actually have to change the world, right? And I mean,
Right.
I struggled with defining personal purpose because I was like, wow, like I don't have skills to change the world or to do something that big and meaningful. And so I think, like, in coaching people to help them discover their personal purpose, like, what would you say to somebody? What does that look like?
Mm. Well, it's actually kind of it is tied to what you just said, because sometimes people think it's so daunting,
Yeah.
like why does everyone else have a purpose but me? Like, what's wrong with me? And the thing, I think, number one is to remind everyone that it shouldn't be that daunting, because at the end of the day, our purpose evolves as we evolve. It evolves as the world around us evolves, and we adapt to it in our own ways. So I think that would be the biggest reminder, number one, before going into sort of any purpose exercise, or even if you're just revisiting your purpose, which I think is like a perfect time to do that. But how I would break it down is just, I would just put draft answers to these questions of, number one, what lights you up, which is like basically kind of an energy question. And it doesn't have to be what lights you up in a positive way. It could be a negative thing too. So answering that question first, and then looking at your talents, naturally what you bring to the world, but also being self-aware enough to see what people are asking you to do naturally, without even putting it out there that, hey, I'm so talented in X, Y, and Z, but people see something in you that perhaps you might not. And then the third one is basically impact. And again, it doesn't have to be this I'm going to change the world impact. It's just like in your immediate sphere, at work, in your life, what kind of impact would you like to make, and do you think you can make? And by answering those three questions, that makes it a lot less daunting as to like my purpose statement for the rest of my life, because it really makes it more immediate,
Yeah.
like to the time and place that we're living in right now.
I love that. I think that's super helpful to people. So let's kind of step back to like leaders and company cultures. And so if you have if you're a leader or you work with a leader that, is kind of on the fence about, agreeing or investing in, making their company culture
Mm.
happier. What do you tell them? Like, what are the benefits to doing this?
Yeah, so I kind of break it down into stats and stories. And for the biggest, like, I actually love working with naysayers because when you might too, by the way you're laughing, because when they see the light,
Yeah.
it's like they're owning it for themselves. They're like, oh, that's why. And so I start with the stats first because, there's a lot of, no offense to, people that care about finances. We all need to. CFOs in the world exist for a reason. But starting with the stats of knowing that, like Fortune's top 100 companies to work for, basically those companies that double down on their people, they outperform the S&P 500 consistently. They've done that for the last 15 years, even in bad economies. What we're seeing also now is this greater uptake of venture capitalists and private equity firms that are putting money where their mouth is and showing how the companies that they group together that actually focus on people and therefore trying to make them happy are outperforming other companies in their portfolio. So I start there and I go, can rattle off all these metrics and statistics on retention and attraction and burnout, especially right now, being able to help all those different factors, the great resignation, all those different factors, if we actually treat our people as an investment and an asset versus an expense. So kind of start there, just to get the the financiers like tuned in, and then I go to the stories. And the stories, it's I think especially for the naysayers, is basically having a story self-reflecting within them, basically holding a mirror. And like you mentioned coaching earlier, so I'm sure you're super familiar with this. It's like basically, we come in, we're just holding a mirror. We're not actually telling them anything that they don't know already.
Mm-hmm.
It's really from within. But it's so fascinating to me when you just ask those simple questions, like the why. Why did y'all start this in the beginning, in the first place, of your own professional career, of your own life, and ask them to start reflecting on their moments of pivotal excuse me, pivotal, I'm going to use it again, pivotal moments of their life, and not just the highs, because we also or oftentimes associate happiness with our high moments, but also their lows. And this has been a big kind of key for us in when we talk about happiness, because our full belief is that is not just learning from our highs, but also really digging deep and sitting with, if not befriending, our lows.
Hmm.
And it's a large part of why I wanted to go beyond happiness, because sometimes we forget that. And especially what happened in the last 2 years, it's been happening to everyone, and being able to embrace, our losses, embrace our grief, embrace our failures along the way. And by doing these exercises with leaders, there, like, it becomes an easier evolution towards that sort of aha reawakening moment of, oh wow, yeah, this isn't me just trying to lead my people. This is about me being honest with myself and how I show up in the world and what it is that I bring that no one else can.
So, uh, so I guess, I mean, as a leader, or really just as a human being, but in the workplace, obviously we have to do the work for ourselves first. But
Mm-hmm.
how can we, as leaders or as colleagues, like what can we do, maybe kind of like immediately or in the short term? Like, what are some tips or strategies to help us create a happier work culture? And I would say, in particular, like, what are there differences that you're seeing or recommending, kind
Mm-hmm.
of like in virtual and hybrid versus things that you might have recommended, when people and teams were kind of co-located together? I feel like that's the big that's the big question
Mhm.
for everything right now. Like, how does this work in a hybrid world?
For sure. I mean, I feel like there's like a two-parter there.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the first question, like what are some practical next steps that people can do, and knowing that, like as we talked about earlier, like having a sense or having a purpose defined and having values defined for a company are defaults, those are given. So
Yeah.
I think the most practical next step, especially because so many of us are remote or hybrid, is doing those exercises for everyone.
Mm.
And by getting it out there, it's especially now when I think, isolation is high, loneliness is high, depression is high, that having those conversations, I mean, it's pretty amazing what people are more willing to share and more vulnerable in sharing. And especially, of course, if we as leaders, take the first step in doing that, then there's a sense of psychological safety. And there's tons of stats on how by creating that psychological safety and not saying, hey, we're going to be a happier team now, we're going to be a happier company. It's like, no, let's be real.
That's
Like,
toxic positivity, right?
yes, like let's be up the realists,
Yeah.
like, and it's so incredible to see just starting at, if you have a huge company, just starting at a team level
Yeah.
and just seeing the interactions deepen, the conversations deepen beyond just, what we're binging on Netflix is important. What we're happy hour drink is going to be is important, but, the richness of conversation and the level of how people just more instinctively are there for each other and basically showing up as human beings, not coworkers, even beyond, behind screens, as we all are most these days. So I think that would be the next like practical step in showing us a level of commitment, and knowing that it's not going to fix everything and not going to fix burnout 100%, but knowing that creating these social bonds is what the world is really looking for. So I think that would be, yeah, I think you'd be able to see really cool results from that in itself, knowing there's a lot of uncertainty still. On the other side of that, with the hybrid model or the remote model, I think we need to remind ourselves that there's been companies out there that have been doing that fully remote way
Yeah.
before COVID. And so it's kind of, let's learn from them. I mean, DH is its own. We've been doing is we've been remote since 2010. WordPress, they've always been remote, always had sort of a sense of rigor to what that means, because it, everyone starts thinking, and now that we've all lived this work life integration for so long, that something's going to break, that there's going to be a time that people are just going to not stop working again or not be so productive or not be so engaged. And that's just not the reality of it. If we do it, intentionally, we build the structures with that intention of having, the people side of it, of rewarding and recognizing based on values, based on our performance, not just the skill side, but what we contribute to others, what we contribute to our purpose, what we contribute to our culture. Then you get a blend of both worlds. So that's where I think hybrid or remote, no matter how long it lasts, which is going to just increase for, as we know, future work is now, we just embed little things along the way. Like, instead of starting a meeting with just diving into the agenda, take 5 minutes to ask a question about one of our values. Who was your favorite person this week that that did something that spotlighted this value, or what was one meaningful thing that happened to you yesterday, and just throw it in the chat or throw it in a Google Doc, and it totally democratizes everything. Like, even the introverts have something to say, right? Because they oftentimes have the most interesting things to say. But I think if we can reframe it and make technology our friend, then it's actually a prime time for us to be able to even be more engaged and connected to each other.
I love that, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So, do you and you don't have to name names here, but do you have like a favorite example or two of companies that you have worked with personally that were able to turn their company cultures around? And what are those stories? Because I think people, like you said at the beginning, people are often tend to say, "Oh no, that wouldn't happen at my company, or that couldn't happen at my company." Like, do you have a favorite story of like even maybe a company or a client you worked with that maybe you even had doubts about, but then
Mm.
then it was completely turned around?
Yeah, I do. There's so many. Like which
That's
one?
good. You're making an impact. I like to hear that.
It's so hard to pick one, and it's hard not to name them because they're because they're usually proud of what they do. But I guess one that comes to mind is so there's actually so it's a construction real estate company out in the Middle East, well, Egypt specifically, and they came to us saying, we want to. They thought it was all about customers and like what's this culture thing we want to put it in our company, and it was more of that kind of notion of checking it off the box of things to do. It's not that they weren't sincere about it, they just weren't really understanding what it really means. But once we
Mm,
started diving deeper into it, this company took it to heart. They're like, "Oh wow, this is not just for our customers. This is for us." And going through these exercises and making it accessible to all. So it wasn't like the senior leadership meeting that did this offsite, came back with values, etc. They included everyone in the company, created their higher purpose, created their values, went as far, and this is a huge one, to create behaviors out of them so
mm.
that they're specific, black and white. Like you don't go down the path of Enron where their number one value is integrity, that kind of thing, just to make sure everyone is on the same, colloquial page and aligned, knowing that we're all in this together. And they saw the results. I mean, they saw the revenues go up. They saw their levels of productivity and engagement, but they took it to the next step. And what I love about them is they realized the immediate effects for themselves, and then they realized how much attached to their purpose. Being a construction real estate, their tagline was "We build happiness," and so they, it's something that they were, they liked, sounded good, but then they realized, oh, that's actually what we do. So what they did was they redesigned their whole headquarters and did it in a way that it was all about their values and all about their higher purpose, so that they had conference rooms that were named after their values. They had walkways. They created walkways specifically to collaborate more between different functions. They created things where you open the door, and if it was your birthday or something, or depending who you are with your security card, they'd play your favorite song. I mean, things like that. Which just they realized the physical space
Yeah.
of embedding these values were so important. And then they went further than that. So they were like, this is pretty cool. But they realized they had a greater purpose. So that's why they decided, we're going to actually help other companies do this too. And so you see this kind of rippling effect. So they're now helping other companies embed purpose and values in a systemic way for results. They're also redesigning their construction projects and their developments for housing, for communities, around positive psychology, around the sense of connectedness, and being able to have a sense of development and progress through learning and education programs. So it really blew my mind, because they're like, they reflected like, wow, this did so much for us. We want to do it for our teams, our customers, and our community at large. And that's how they grew from just that one project.
I love that, and it sounds like I wanna, like, find out who this company is and go buy one of their homes.
Yeah, yeah.
Or at least rent it and live in it for a little while.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Egypt's a pretty beautiful place. Just hanging out by the
Yeah.
pyramids is not bad.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your book. You've mentioned it a few times, but I wanna dig into why beyond happiness. Can you talk about how you arrived at that, what it
Mm.
means. And you've talked about this a little bit already, but I want to dig deeper into why you went to Beyond and kind of what all is that about, and what will we learn from your book?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about this before we started this, this podcast, because we both were writing during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was this case for you, and I'm curious to hear. But every time something hit the headlines in the media, I was just like, what the hell? Like, I can't write the book I was supposed to write. Like, the outline that the publisher, accepted, and it was just not enough for me. And so, with COVID, and then the recession, and then social unrest, and then ultimately for me, and everyone had this in some form or another. But one of my lowest lows was losing my business partner and one of my best friends, Tony, at the end of 2020.
Yeah.
And so that's what brought me to the Beyond part. Because when I first started, it was like, oh, I'm just going to capture all these stories, stats and stories about all these companies and governments and hospital systems that are doing this amazing work, so people can realize they can do it too. And that was not enough anymore, especially seeing how many people were, what they were going through.
Right.
And going and suffering in many ways. And I don't use that term lightly. So that's where I took the book, to get real, about that subject matter of, everyone has their own perception of happiness. And there's a lot of greatness and positivity to be discussed around that. But until we actually are able to embrace the lows and our shadows within ourselves, and therefore us as leaders, and therefore our teams and companies, then we can only go so far. The whole cliche of you don't really know your highs until you know your lows is actually true. But to actually experience and be able to, as you said earlier, do the work within ourselves, then we really don't get to experience that full gamut of what that really means. So that's why I wanted to bring that to light, to the table, of what really is happiness and what's beyond it, and how companies now and organizations and teams can actually integrate and embed that in a way that makes people feel like it's not just a happiness we're talking about anymore. It's just about being human beings to one another.
Yeah, I think that I think you ended up with the right book. Right? Funny how we go down that path. I think in many ways our paths are similar, because there's a lot in our book about the impact that technology has had on our ability to develop and sustain meaningful relationships in the workplace. And we were writing it at a time when really the only thing keeping us connected to our colleagues and many of our loved ones was our technology. And so we kind of had to step back and say, okay, wait a minute. How do we actually use technology to augment those relationships, or what makes us human, but not replace it? And so I think certainly we had perhaps a similar rethinking of like, okay, what do we really want to say here, and how has what we're going through changed or enhanced our perspective a little bit. I love it.
Yeah, I love what you did too. I mean, it's beautiful how you were able to capture that. And who knew, like technology being our ally in all of that. So
So, and it's not going away. So we do need to figure out how to use it better, to make us better humans, or bring forward our humanity. And I have a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So
yeah, totally.
Well, Jen, is there any final words of wisdom? This has been great. I love the fact that there's been some practical tips and takeaways. I like to have that throughout the show. But any last pieces of wisdom you want to leave the listeners with?
Oh, wow. I guess part of it is just the whole daunting thing. It doesn't have to be. And even though these like big questions are happening around us in terms of how do we work, where do we work, what role do we want to take, how do we reprioritize basically the minutes of our day, knowing we had a lot of time to reflect on, are we spending it the right way? Like those kind of questions, if we can just reframe it in a way so that it's not so daunting. And it really is just about, the simple things of what means the most, and prioritizing around that. It helps these big, lofty sort of legacy questions get simplified, and that impacts our daily actions and behaviors. And most of all, I think it impacts the way we connect and love one another.
I love that. We're ending on a perfect note. So thank you for that. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jen. One and Jen, let's do this together. We've got so much goodness going on.
We do. Absolutely. This is just the beginning, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
I'm so grateful Jen could be with us today to talk about how to make our workplaces happier. Thank you to our producers, Rivet 360, and our listeners. You can find the Work Well podcast series on Deloitte.com, or you can visit various podcatchers using the keyword Work Well, all one word, to hear more. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. If you have a topic you'd like to hear on the Work Well podcast series, or maybe a story you would like to share, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. My profile is under the name Jen Fisher, or on Twitter at JenFish23. We're always open to your recommendations and feedback. And of course, if you like what you hear, please share, post, and like this podcast. Thank you, and be well.